I think it's time I address the C word. I know, it's a dirty word that gets a lot of reaction out of people hearing it, but we're all grown-ups here. After all, you either have one, come from one, or at least have to interact with them as you move about in your society. Some are beautiful, some are ugly, some are young, some are old, but they are all around you. You're never going to get away from them unless you go and live somewhere as a hermit. So I think it's worth looking at the influence they have. Of course, I'm talking about communities.
Now I thought this girl in presidential school.
You like that beach?
It is cool. It is cool.
You my beach!
This vid has been weeks in the making. Don't expect more though, it's just because I'm slow. It began in response to a couple of audience comments on an offhand remark I made during a honey badger hangout. The topic had turned to the idea of human desire to belong to something greater than oneself, and some of the factors that seem to be involved, both in why certain groups are powerfully popular and appealing, as well as some common traits of the people who are attracted to them. Teal deer, why do human beings form groups, and why do some groups attract distinct clines of personality types? This is pretty quicksandy territory for me. Not only do I try really hard not to pull the good old SJW Kreskin of everyone involved in X clearly has Y issues, but even when I'm looking at the bulk of established patterns of behavior, it's still largely qualitative, at least to my eye.
Hello, darkness,
but I dusted off the old soc and psych books and started rereading. So while I'm reading, shit blows up on YouTube with kangaroos and monkeys and flying monkeys and bears, like fucking animal crackers laced with LSD. And it becomes this perfect real-life demonstration of different definitions of community and tribal rallying. People are picking sides, calling each other out for perceived support or perceived lack of support, with some commenters echoing sentiments like, "Lisa, you're tearing me apart," with respect to the something community, and others saying, "There is no community, only Zool." So I hit the pause button and just watched it unfold. And then, just as that was calming, there cropped up the Battle of the Beards, with again a polarized reaction from fans and subscribers of both Computing Forever and Sargon of Akkad. And then Colin Kaepernick popped up, illustrating the point very well that holes in your family identity can fester for years before cropping up later to influence decisions, but more on him later. So I crammed all this stuff through the processing center, and hopefully by the end of this, it'll be a little more clear where my perspective on community, cults, groupthink, and tribalism comes from. And if not, you can put me on while you do dishes and pretend I'm narrating Lady Chatterley's Lover or something. You are part of a community, one way or another. This is pretty basic. Even if you live in an attic and keep pigeons, you are a de facto part of the people who live in attics and keep pigeons community. I am part of the, deep breath, YouTube content creator community, the Canadian community, the white community, the female community, the metal fan community, the sexy bitch community, the ex-goth community, and a host of other traits that mean I have common ground and common interests with other humans. And if you're a human, you do too. And trust me, you are human, no matter what Tumblr is trying to tell you. But this is passive community. You didn't necessarily go out of your way to choose these communities. They're just kind of a default descriptor. And giving passive community too much weight is how we get things like all men are pigs, all whites are racist, all cis people are transphobic. Stop! This is where bullshit like race traitor and gender traitor comes up. I'm fucking white, and I can go one province over to a bunch of other white folks I can barely communicate with either in terms of language or culture. Passive community rhetoric, as any kind of hard and fast moral or value judgment, is and always will be the tool of bullies, cowards, and fools. But then, Then there's your chosen community, your new family. And this is where it gets really interesting, because there's that element of choice, the active opt-in element of who we decide to actively ally ourselves and identify with. So here's the dry, textbooky part. I'll try and keep it short. It's been pretty well established, at least here in healthcare, that humans need human interaction. Community and interpersonal involvement is a serious set of criteria in ongoing diagnostics, both in the specific, such as with mental health evaluation, and in the general. Do you have family or community ties that will assist in keeping you healthy and well? Community ties are also a factor in our legal system, as anyone who has been through family court has likely already been made aware of. The premise that humans may be evaluated on how they interact with other humans is not new. You can go all the way back to Aristotle for this. So while I know it rubs some the wrong way to acknowledge that human interaction is a signal of health, and I get that as a misanthropic, unjoiny, hermity, introverty type myself, it is a huge part of the overall human experience. Our first community is our family. Erikson's theory of 8 stages of life and Bowlby's attachment and separation theory both illustrate very well how at every stage of life, our family ties influence behavior heavily. From family, we go out to friends, then the greater community as a whole. But if that primary family linchpin is fucked from jump, it's going to have an impact on every other active community choice a person makes. Now I hear you. Some of you are saying, but Bunny, my family life was fucked and I turned out just fine. If that's the case, that is awesome. You probably worked very hard to get there, and you should pat yourself on the back. But that doesn't change the overall patterns and trends of what happens when people who are estranged from or alienated by their families try to replace those families with new ones, especially if they still have outstanding wounds and holes in them they're trying to fill. Not even making a sex joke here, it's too serious. Human beings want to be accepted by someone or something that makes them feel good about being who they are. See also Colin Kaepernick. For those who don't know, he's the NFL player who's caused a shitstir by refusing to stand for the national anthem at games, citing racial injustice in America. What many don't know is that his black father was never a part of his life. He was adopted by a white family, and even by his own accounts, they were incredibly loving and supportive. This is a man who had a wonderful family by his own account, who is now making millions of dollars. I'm not going to pretend to psychoanalyze him, but something is compelling him to claim his black identity in a very public way. Nothing I'm saying here is new or revolutionary. I'm not breaking ground. I touched on this in my video talking about Jim Jones and the Jonestown Massacre. Sargon of Akkad just did a couple of videos on cults and cult ideology. I'll link them in the low bar. But if I put my devil horns on, with apologies to Wizard of Cause for stealing the visual shtick, and I wanted to design an ideology that would bring people together in the least constructive and most controllable way possible, this is what I do. Cue the evil music.
Bring me your wounded and weak. Bring me those who were bullied at school for being different or nerds. Bring me fatties and fags and trannies. Bring me the abused. Bring me the perpetually scared. Bring me the mentally ill. Bring me poor and disenfranchised, and then bring me the rich and guilty. I will take their pain and tell them nothing is ever their fault. I will encourage them to eat what they want, wear what they want, fuck what they want, with no sense of responsibility or consequence. I will tell them their new family will never discriminate against them, and that we will wage war against everyone who has ever hurt their fifis. I will give them safe spaces and their own language to isolate them and feel superior and they will become so dependent upon me to protect them at all times that they will be mine. Mine! Excuse me, I got some emphysema.
The human need for community, to not only belong to a group of other humans, but also to belong to something greater than the individual, can really easily be exploited. Religion and nationalism both succeed exactly because they hit both of those notes simultaneously. For a better breakdown on this, I'd suggest reading The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, which gets into incredible detail on how we form our moral matrices, why certain ideological buttons have the power to push humans to do things well outside their natural morality, and how and why the hive switch gets flipped. Certainly better than I can present here anyway. But I've chosen one quote that represents what I'm trying to present here well, I think. Quote, "Most of human nature was shaped by natural selection operating at the level of the individual. Most, but not all. We have a few group-related adaptations too, as many Americans discovered in the days after 9/11. We humans have a dual nature. We're selfish primates who long to be part of something larger and nobler than ourselves. We're 90% chimp and 10% bee." End quote. And I think many people are aware, either instinctively or consciously, of the danger of becoming too entrenched in a particular community or ideology. But is it the dose that makes the poison? That being the level of involvement, the subsumption of personal identity for greater group identity? Or is it the poison that makes the poison? I say it's both, under a pretty simple premise. The toxicity of a discrete community is directly proportional to the consequences for disobedience. Now, this tells you a lot about how my brain works, but I compare it to the LD50 toxicity scale used in toxicology and pharmacology. The LD50, or median lethal dose, is just the amount of an administered substance necessary to kill half, that's where the 50 comes in, 50%, of a sample population. So inherently more dangerous substances require a much lower administered dose to potentially prove fatal. When I'm critiquing a community or an ideology, this is my fundamental benchmark. If I'm not an MRA, and I say that, I have no consequence. If I'm not a feminist, and I say that, I have internalized misogyny. I'm a gender traitor. I'm a sexist. If I say I'm not a Christian, I have no consequence. If I say I'm not a Muslim, I'm kafira. So using the LD50 model, it's both the poison and the dose, with variables dependent upon the individual's unique psychological makeup. But this is why I can agree with some feminist arguments, but overall it's become so destructive and poisonous, I've disengaged from the movement. This is why I can support some angles of Black Lives Matter, but have nothing but contempt for the movement itself now. This is why I can be friendly with Muslims, but I do not hesitate to reject Sharia. This is why I'm a patriot and not a white nationalist, because I do want a community, and I do want to be part of something greater than myself, but I'm not going to sell out my core values to do it, no matter how many virgins I'm promised. Bane666 says, don't drink the poison Kool-Aid. Best advice on YouTube to date, even if my take on it is a bit nerdier. Thank you so much for listening.